Imagine that for over a period of months and years, and you know that it isn't true. I think the most important thing for them, before I do any.
There are moments in television history that stop the world. Moments so charged, so raw, and so seemingly revelatory that millions of people pause everything they're doing just to witness what unfolds on their screens. The interview between Oprah Winfrey and Meghan Markle on March 7, 2021, was exactly that kind of moment. It was television at its most dramatic. It was celebrity journalism at its most powerful. And for a brief electric window of time, it felt like the absolute unfiltered truth was being broadcast into living rooms across the globe. But what happens when that truth starts to crack? What happens when the very foundation of the most watched celebrity interview in a generation begins to show serious, undeniable fractures? What happens when the woman who sat across from Meghan Markle, nodding, validating, and amplifying every word, suddenly goes very, very quiet? That is exactly what we are here to talk about today. Because Oprah Winfrey, one of the most celebrated and powerful media personalities in the history of American broadcasting, has finally begun breaking her silence on the controversy surrounding Meghan Markle's now infamous claim about a secret backyard wedding. And the way she is doing it, not with a dramatic press conference or a tearful television confession, but with a slow, deliberate, unmistakable silence and distance, tells us everything we need to know. So buckle in, because this story goes deeper than a garden vow exchange. It goes deeper than royal protocol or Church of England marriage law. This is a story about trust, credibility, legacy, and what happens when one of the world's greatest storytellers stakes her reputation on someone else's narrative, and that narrative does not hold up. To understand where we are today, we need to go back to the beginning, not just to March 2021, but to the cultural moment that made that interview so extraordinarily significant. By the time Meghan Markle sat down with Oprah Winfrey, the public appetite for the full Sussex story was enormous. Harry and Meghan had stepped back from their roles as senior royals in January 2020. They had relocated to North America. They had signed multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify. And through all of it, they had said very little publicly about why they really left. The Oprah interview was supposed to change all of that. It was billed as the moment of total transparency, the moment when Meghan and Harry would finally, fully speak their truth without filters, without palace press offices managing the narrative, and without the constraints of royal protocol. And Oprah Winfrey was the perfect vessel for that story. Her entire brand, built over decades of broadcasting, is rooted in the idea of authentic human connection and unvarnished honesty. When Oprah sits across from you and looks you in the eye, the audience believes that what they are hearing is real. Over 17 million Americans watched that broadcast on CBS. In the United Kingdom, viewing figures were similarly staggering. The interview became an instant cultural flashpoint, sparking debates about race within the British royal institution, about mental health, about the obligations of public service, and about the treatment of a woman who had married into one of the most scrutinized families on the planet. For many people, that interview was not just entertaining. It felt genuinely important. And then came the claim that would, in time, unravel so much of what made the interview feel trustworthy. In the middle of what was already an emotionally intense conversation, Meghan Markle dropped what felt like a stunning personal revelation. She told Oprah that 3 days before their grand royal wedding at Windsor Castle on May 19, 2018, she and Prince Harry had already privately married. Just the two of them, she said, along with the Archbishop of Canterbury, in the garden of their home at Kensington Palace. She described it with warmth and intimacy. The big public wedding, she explained, was for the world. But their real union, the one that mattered to them spiritually and emotionally, happened quietly, privately, with only God and the Archbishop present. Harry sat beside her and confirmed the story, adding his own gentle endorsement of the memory. It was, by any measure, a beautiful anecdote. It positioned Harry and Meghan as a couple so deeply connected, so authentic in their love, that they had essentially created their own sacred ceremony apart from the spectacle of royal tradition. Oprah received this revelation the way she receives most revelations in her interviews. With wide eyes, a slow nod, and an expression that communicated deep emotional resonance. She did not push back. She did not ask a single clarifying question about how English marriage law works, or whether what Meghan was describing could actually be legally recognized. The moment floated past unchallenged, wrapped in the warmth of the conversation, and millions of viewers accepted it completely. The problem, as it turned out, was that the claim was legally and factually impossible. The first and most authoritative challenge to Meghan's backyard wedding story came from an extraordinary source. The Archbishop of Canterbury himself, Justin Welby, the very man Meghan claimed had married them in secret, spoke directly to the issue. In an interview with the Italian newspaper La Repubblica, Welby addressed the claim with careful but unmistakable clarity. He confirmed that the legal wedding took place on May 19, 2018, the day the world watched the ceremony at St. George's Chapel. He pointed out that he had signed the official wedding certificate, a legal document, and that signing a false certificate would have constituted a serious criminal offense. That statement, coming from the Archbishop himself, was devastating to the credibility of Meghan's account. Staff at Lambeth Palace later added further clarification, confirming that while the Archbishop had indeed met privately with Harry and Meghan before their wedding, these meetings were pastoral and personal in nature. They were conversations in preparation for marriage, not a marriage ceremony itself. A spokesperson for Lambeth Palace made it explicitly clear that no wedding of any kind took place until the nationally televised ceremony at Windsor Castle. The legal picture was equally definitive. Marriage law in England and Wales requires a ceremony to take place at an officially authorized venue. It requires a minimum of 2 witnesses beyond the officiant and the couple. An outdoor exchange of vows in a private garden, attended by only 3 people, with no authorized venue, no registered witnesses, and no legal documentation, does not constitute a marriage under English law by any definition. Legal experts were unanimous and unambiguous on this point. Stephen Borton, a former chief clerk at the faculty office who had personally helped draft the special license that allowed Harry and Meghan to marry at St. George's Chapel, was perhaps the most direct of all. He stated plainly that Meghan was clearly confused and misinformed. The license he had prepared authorized their marriage at St. George's Chapel on May 19th, and what happened there before millions of witnesses was the one and only legal wedding recognized by both the Church of England and the law of the land. Then came the document that made denial completely impossible. On March 21, 2021, just 2 weeks after the Oprah interview aired, the official marriage certificate for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex was made public through the General Register Office. That certificate listed May 19, 2018, as the date of the marriage. It listed St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle, as the location. It recorded Thomas Markle and Prince Charles as the 2 legal witnesses. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation, and no alternative reading of what the document said. Faced with this overwhelming combination of evidence, the Archbishop's own words, legal expert analysis, Lambeth Palace clarification, and the public marriage certificate, Harry and Meghan spokesperson was forced to issue a statement. The couple, it was acknowledged, had exchanged personal vows a few days before the official ceremony. But those vows were not a legal marriage. They were a private, personal moment between 2 people in love. They were meaningful, but they were not, in any legal or official sense, a wedding. Here is where the story becomes about more than just Meghan Markle. Here is where Oprah Winfrey's role in this entire episode demands serious examination. Oprah did not stumble into this interview unprepared. She did not agree to a spontaneous conversation over lunch. The interview with Harry and Meghan was a months-long production undertaking. It involved extensive coordination between Harpo Productions, Oprah's company, and the Sussex team. Producers prepared. Research was conducted. The questions, even if they felt organic in the moment, were developed with care and intention. This was a major network broadcast event, not an afternoon chat. Oprah is also, it must be said, one of the most experienced interviewers who has ever sat in front of a camera. She has interviewed presidents, world leaders, convicted criminals, survivors of extraordinary trauma, and the most famous celebrities on the planet across more than 4 decades of broadcasting. She has a reputation built entirely on her ability to see past the surface of what someone is telling her and find the deeper truth underneath. That is her gift. That is her legacy. That is the reason 17 million people trusted what they were watching. So the question that critics and media observers have been asking ever since is a straightforward one. Why did Oprah not ask a single follow-up question about the backyard wedding claim? Why, when Meghan described a secret legal marriage with just 3 people present in a private garden, did Oprah not pause and say, "Wait, is that actually possible under English law?" Why did no one in the production team, in all the weeks of preparation, think to look up the basic requirements for a legally valid marriage ceremony in England? There are 2 possible explanations, and neither one reflects particularly well on the broadcast. The first possibility is that Oprah and her team genuinely did not know enough about Church of England marriage requirements to recognize that what Meghan was describing was legally impossible. If that is the case, then the most celebrated interview of the past decade was assembled without even basic fact-checking of its most dramatic claim. The second possibility is that the claim was allowed to pass unchallenged because it was simply too good a moment to interrupt. It was emotionally resonant, it was compelling television, and pressing Meghan on the legal specifics would have broken the mood and complicated the narrative. Either way, what resulted was millions of viewers being presented with a story that was, by every legal and factual measure, untrue, without any challenge or context from the woman who was supposed to be asking the hard questions. In the immediate aftermath of the interview, Oprah was firmly in the Sussex corner. She appeared in follow-up broadcasts to discuss the interview's impact. She spoke publicly about Meghan and Harry with warmth and admiration. She was, by all appearances, a committed ally of the couple and a proud champion of the interview she had produced. But something began to change as the months passed and the scrutiny deepened. The backyard wedding story collapsed. Other claims from the interview came under increasing challenge and dispute. The public narrative around Harry and Meghan grew more complicated and more divisive. And Oprah Winfrey, with the instincts of someone who has survived and thrived in the media landscape for over 40 years, began a very careful, very gradual, and very deliberate retreat. The signs of this retreat have not been dramatic. There has been no public falling out, no tearful statement, no angry social media exchange. What there has been is something far more telling in its own quiet way: absence. Oprah has stopped mentioning Meghan and Harry in her public appearances and interviews. She has stopped championing the interview that was once her crowning recent achievement. In a notable podcast appearance on Let's Talk Off Camera with Kelly Ripa, Oprah casually referred to the couple as the Sussexes in a tone that struck observers as noticeably different from the warm, personal register she had once used when speaking about them. On another occasion, when Oprah discussed the inner circle of friends who matter most to her, she named names with specificity and warmth. Maria Shriver, Gayle King, long-standing friends from across decades in the public eye. Meghan Markle was not among them. That omission, from a woman who once positioned herself as a close confidant and supporter of the Duchess, did not go unnoticed by people watching closely. When Meghan launched her lifestyle brand, first introduced to the world as American Riviera Orchard and later rebranded as Ever, the Hollywood establishment that had once embraced her proved conspicuously quiet. Oprah was among those who offered no public show of support. No Instagram story, no enthusiastic endorsement, no casual mention in an interview. For context, this is a woman who built much of her cultural influence on recommending and championing products and people she believed in. Her silence on Meghan's new venture was, in its own way, deafening. PR analysts and media watchers have noted that Meghan's own birthday celebrations have similarly lacked the Oprah presence that might once have been expected. The friendship that once seemed like one of Meghan's most powerful connections in the American entertainment world has, by all visible evidence, gone almost entirely cold. It would be easy to dismiss all of this as celebrity gossip, as the inevitable shifting of alliances and friendships in a world where reputations are currency and associations carry consequences. But this story matters for reasons that go well beyond who is and is not currently on Meghan Markle's guest list or Oprah's podcast mentions. It matters because the Oprah interview did not just entertain people. It shaped public opinion about real institutions, real families, and real issues. The interview sparked serious conversations about racism within the British royal family. It contributed to a profound and possibly permanent rift between Prince Harry and his father King Charles and his brother Prince William. It changed the global perception of the monarchy. These are not trivial consequences. They are lasting, significant impacts that flow directly from an interview whose central emotional anchor, the story of a secret wedding, of a couple so in love and so authentic that they married privately before facing the world, turned out to be factually inaccurate. When the foundation of a story is compromised, everything built on top of that foundation deserves a second look. That is not a witch hunt. That is simply how credibility and trust work. If a narrator is willing to present a private vow exchange as a legal marriage ceremony to millions of viewers without correction, then the audience is entitled to ask what else in that narrative may have been shaped more by emotional preference than by factual precision. The palace's response at the time was, in retrospect, more pointed than it may have initially appeared. The carefully worded statement that recollections may vary was interpreted by many at the time as a weak and evasive response. Viewed now, in light of everything that has been established about the wedding claim and other disputed assertions from the interview, it looks considerably more measured and accurate. The backyard wedding story does not exist in isolation. It is one piece of a larger mosaic of claims from the Oprah interview that have, over time, been questioned, disputed, or walked back in various ways. Meghan stated during the interview that the palace had removed her access to her personal documents, including her passport and driver's license. This claim painted a picture of an institution that had essentially imprisoned her. Palace sources disputed this account, and the claim was never independently verified or substantiated with any documentary evidence. Meghan also suggested during the interview that she had little knowledge of or fascination with the royal family before meeting Prince Harry. This claim sat awkwardly alongside the existence of her lifestyle blog, The Tig, in which she had written about royal traditions and figures with evident enthusiasm. A former close friend, Nina Pryor, went on record to say that Meghan had always been deeply fascinated by the royal family and had specifically admired Princess Diana throughout her adult life. The financial narrative offered during the interview also raised questions. Prince Harry described being cut off financially by his father and suggested that the major commercial deals with Netflix and Spotify were not part of any premeditated plan, but were effectively forced upon them by circumstance. The timeline of when exactly those deals were negotiated and signed, compared to when Harry says the financial support from Prince Charles ended, has never been entirely resolved in a way that makes the account internally consistent. Then there was the matter of timing. The interview was scheduled and broadcast while Prince Philip was recovering from serious heart surgery in hospital. Multiple members of Parliament and public figures called for Harry and Meghan to delay the broadcast out of basic respect for an elderly man in serious medical decline. They did not delay it. Prince Philip died less than a month after the interview aired on April 9, 2021. The decision to proceed with the broadcast, when they did, remains one of the most criticized choices the couple made during that entire period. None of these individual elements is necessarily proof of deliberate deception. People misremember. People frame their experiences through the lens of their own emotional reality. People describe things in ways that reflect how those things felt rather than precisely how those things occurred. That is a deeply human tendency, and it deserves a measure of understanding. But when you lay all of these elements side by side, a consistent pattern emerges. A pattern in which the most emotionally compelling version of every story is the version that was told, regardless of whether that version aligned precisely with the factual record. For Oprah Winfrey specifically, this entire episode carries a particular kind of weight. Her brand is not just about entertainment. It is not just about television or books or film or any of the other dimensions of her extraordinary career. Her brand is fundamentally about truth, about the belief that if you sit with Oprah Winfrey and she looks at you and asks you a question, what comes back is real. That promise is the entire basis of her cultural authority. when the most dramatic claim from her most watched interview in years turned out to be legally impossible, and when that impossibility was confirmed not by tabloid gossip, but by the Archbishop of Canterbury and the official marriage register of England and Wales, something in that promise was damaged, not destroyed. Oprah's legacy is far too vast and far too substantial to be undone by a single interview. But dented, certainly. Complicated, absolutely. The distance she has since placed between herself and the Sussexes is, in this light, entirely understandable from a strategic standpoint. In Hollywood and in media, reputation is managed with extraordinary care. Associations that once seemed beneficial can become liabilities when circumstances change. Oprah staying closely and visibly aligned with Harry and Meghan as questions about the interview's credibility mounted would have meant continuously defending a story that her own broadcast had failed to properly scrutinize. The quieter and more dignified exit was to simply say less, appear less, and allow the connection to fade naturally into the background. But there is something worth sitting with in that strategic retreat. Because the same editorial decisions that allowed the backyard wedding story to go unchallenged were, presumably, decisions made in pursuit of a compelling and emotionally powerful broadcast. The interests of great television and the interests of rigorous factual accuracy sometimes pull in different directions. On March 7, 2021, great television won. And in the years since,